The prairie evening bled gold into violet, the kind of light that made even splintered wood and rusted hinges look like they belonged in a painting. Dust rolled slow through the main street of the settlement, curling around boots, settling in the seams of old coats. At the far end, framed against the sky, the gallows rose like a crooked finger. The rope hung ready, swaying with a lazy confidence of something that had all night to do its work. The girl stood on the rough boards, wrists bound in front, the coarse hemp noose tight against the side of her neck. Her eyes were fixed somewhere past the crowd, past the street, past all of this, fixed on something no one else could see. Torn cloth hung from her shoulders, dust streaking the skin beneath. The wind lifted her hair and laid it back down again like it was reluctant to let go. Around her, settlers had gathered in a ragged half-circle. Men with jawlines set hard, women with lips pressed in. A few children pulled close to their mothers' skirts. The smell of sweat leather and oil would mingle with the faint tang of gun oil. A lean man in a black preacher's coat stepped forward, voice rising in half-chant, half-sermon. His words about justice sounded rehearsed, almost practiced the thrill of it. No one asked her to speak. No one wanted her to. The executioner, a broad man with a scar across his chin, adjusted the rope and tugged at the knot with fingers like meat hooks. He didn't look her in the eye. Maybe that was mercy, or maybe it was habit. His breath came slow and heavy, the way a man breathes when the outcome is certain. From beyond the last row of shacks, a horse's faint snort carried in the wind. No one seemed to hear it except her. A flicker passed through her eyes, not hope exactly, but awareness. Far off, on a ridge where the prairie met the last wash of sun, a figure sat astride a dark horse. He was motionless enough to be mistaken for a rock or a shadowed post. The brim of his hat shaded his face, but his gaze cut through the distance. The horse shifted, muscles rippling under dark hide, but the rider did not move. The preacher lifted a hand for silence. His voice dropped low, each word deliberate. The crowd leaned forward, as though the killing would be sweeter if they heard every syllable of the sentence. The executioner stepped back, hands settling on a lever. The boards creaked beneath the girl's bare feet. She blinked once, slow, then inhaled, chest rising against the ropes. The sound of the wind thickened, carrying grit that hissed against the gallows frame. A child coughed somewhere in the crowd, the sound too loud in the heavy stillness. Up on the ridge, the rider's hand shifted, just enough to settle on the worn stock of his rifle. His other hand loosened the reins. In the space between one heartbeat and the next, the last strip of sunlight slid away, leaving the town in the half-light of coming night. The executioner glanced at the preacher, who gave the smallest nod. The lever creaked as weight shifted toward the drop. The rope trembled against the girl's neck. She closed her eyes. A rifle cracked. The sound tore through the street, sharp enough to make every head flinch toward the echo. The executioner's arm jerked, blood blooming through his sleeve as he stumbled back from a lever. Shouts erupted, confusion scattering the line between law and chaos. The girl's eyes snapped open. The crowd broke like a kicked anthill, men reaching for rifles, women pulling children away. The preacher ducked behind a post, his black coat flaring like wings. Another shot rang, this one closer. A horse thundered into the street, hooves striking sparks from the stone. The rider sat tall, coat flaring with each stride, rifle balanced across the saddle. His eyes never left the gallows. Dust churned in his wake, swallowing the edges of the crowd. He didn't slow as he reached the platform. One swing of his arm cut the rope free, and the girl fell forward into him. He caught her weight like it was nothing, set her on her feet, and stepped between her and the crowd. The moment held, a line drawn not in words, but in the stillness between two armed men and a frightened town. The wind carried the creak of signs, the thump of boots on hollow boards. Somewhere in the back of the crowd, a man shouted, and hands reached for gun stocks. The rider's voice was quiet, but carried in the hush. Not today. It was enough to freeze them for a heartbeat. Enough for him to lift her onto the saddle behind him. Enough for the horse to wheel and plunge toward the open prairie, dust swallowing them whole. By the time the first settler raised his rifle, they were already fading into the night. The horse's breath came hard and hot in the cool night air. hooves drumming the earth like a war beat. She clung to the saddle horn, her wrists still raw where the rope had bitten, each jolt sending fire through her arms. Behind them, the settlement had collapsed into shouts and gunfire. The noise carried on the wind like a warning that would not fade. The rider said nothing. His coat snapped in the gusts, and every movement of his body matched the horse's rhythm, as though man and beast shared the same heartbeat. The prairie opened wide before them, silvered by a thin moon. Grass bent low under the weight of the wind, hiding the occasional flash of a jackrabbit darting away from their path. She risked a glance over her shoulder. The town was already a smear of shadow, but flickers of lamplight still pulsed faintly, as if the place itself refused to let her go. Somewhere back there, men would be saddling their own horses, faces twisted in the promise of payback. He slowed the pace only when the land began to dip toward a narrow creek. Water glimmered faintly in its bed, shallow and quick over smooth stones. He swung down in a single, practiced motion and held the reins while the horse drank. She slid from the saddle, unsteady on her feet, knees buckling before she caught herself. "You can walk." His voice was low, each word measured. "I'm not broken," she answered, though the tremor in her leg betrayed her. He nodded once, as if that settled it, and crouched to refill a battered canteen. The silence between them was taut, filled only by the sounds of the horse's breath and the rush of the creek. She studied him in the dim light, the lines around his eyes, the scars that crossed the back of his left hand. His rifle leaned against a rock within easy reach. "You didn't have to do that," she said at last. He looked at her, the moon catching in the darkness of his gaze. "Didn't have to," he agreed, and took a long drink from the canteen before offering it to her. The water was cold, almost sharp in her throat. "Then why?" she pressed. His answer came after a pause. "Not everyone deserved a rope." It wasn't the reply she'd expected, but it was final enough that she didn't ask again. She knelt to wash the dust from her face, watching the water swirl away in muddy spirals. The marks on her neck throbbed with each beat of her heart. From somewhere in the distance, faint hoofbeats stirred the air. He heard them first, straightening with a slow deliberation that told her he'd been expecting this. "They'll follow," he said. "Of course they will." She didn't try to hide her bitterness. He saddled the horse again and gestured for her to mount. This time she swung up without help, though her hands shook as they gripped the saddle. He mounted behind her, his presence steady and solid against her back, and they set off at a ground-eating pace that kept the creek's ribbon of water on their left. The night stretched on in silence. She could feel his watchfulness in the way he shifted his weight, the way his hand hovered near the rifle at his side even as the horse moved. Every sound, the cry of a night bird, the snap of a branch, seemed sharper, more dangerous. When they finally stopped again, it was in the lee of a jagged outcrop, where the wind couldn't reach. He unsaddled the horse and let it graze while she lowered herself to the ground. Her body ached, but weariness was not enough to quiet the churn in her mind. "They think I killed him," she said suddenly. He didn't look up from where he was checking his ammunition. "Did you?" Her jaw tightened. "He came for me in the dark. I took the knife from him and—" She stopped, the rest caught her throat. He didn't press her. Instead, he set the rifle aside and leaned back against the stone. "That's enough for them. Doesn't matter what really happened." She studied him, the firelight from his small camp flame catching on the hard angles of his face. "And you? You just ride in and decide who gets to live?" "Sometimes," he said simply and stretched his legs toward the heat. The fire was small, built low to keep from being seen. Its smoke clung to the cold air. She warmed her hands over it, wondering if he was the kind of man who saved people or the kind who simply refused to watch certain kinds of deaths. The faint drum of hoofbeats returned, closer now. He doused the fire with a swift kick of dirt. "They've split up," he said. "Half will try to push us toward the ridge. The others will follow the creek. And you know this how? Because it's what I would do." He slung the rifle over his shoulder and met her eyes. "We keep moving." The horse tossed its head, impatient. They mounted again, and the prairie opened up before them, darker now as the moon slid behind a bank of clouds. Somewhere in the blackness behind them, men were hunting. She realized that every mile they rode deeper into the night, was also a mile further from any place she'd ever known. When the first drops of rain fell, he urged the horse faster. The ground turned slick beneath the hooves, each stride a careful gamble between speed and safety. She could taste iron in the air, the promise of storm. By the time they crested the next rise, the wind had shifted, carrying with it the faint echo of a shout. She twisted to look back, but saw only darkness. He leaned forward, speaking just loud enough for her to hear over the wind. "Hold on. This doesn't end tonight." Something in the way he said it made her believe him, though she couldn't say why. The rain thickened, erasing the sound of pursuit, and the prairie swallowed them once more. Dawn crept in pale and cold, seeping over the prairie like a slow tide. Mist clung to the low places, curling around tufts of grass and the bones of old trees long dead. She stirred from where she had dozed against a rock, her body stiff from the ride and the damp. The warrior was already awake, crouched by the horse, checking the cinch and running a practiced hand along the animal's flank. His eyes flicked toward the horizon more than once, measuring something only he seemed to see. "You didn't sleep," she said. He shook his head. "They're out there." She followed his gaze, but the horizon was empty. The silence of the morning was deceptive. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. She felt the pressure of unseen eyes, a sense of being tracked that crawled beneath her skin. They broke camp without a fire, chewing strips of tough dried meat as they rode. The ground began to change, less open grass, more stone and dips in the land where water once ran. Her hands tightened on the reins. "You think they'll come at us from behind?" "Not just behind." He pointed toward a narrow rise ahead. "If they got sense, they'll try to cut us off there." Her pulse quickened. "Then we don't go there." He didn't answer, only nudged the horse onward. She realized he wasn't avoiding the rise because he meant to use it. The wind shifted, and faint in the distance came the sound she dreaded. Hooves, more than one set, drumming the earth in a steady, hungry rhythm. He halted the horse and dismounted, pressing his palm to the ground. "Two groups," he murmured. "One behind, one circling to the ridge. Then we're trapped." He gave her a look that was almost a smile. "Only if we stop." They pressed forward at a ground-eating trot, weaving between outcrops and dry creek beds. The terrain narrowed until stone walls rose around them, the path squeezing into a canyon barely wide enough for the horse to pass. She heard the echo of their own hoofbeats bouncing back at them, doubled and tripled, until she couldn't tell if the sounds were theirs or the posse's. The first shot came from above, shattering stone near her head. She ducked instinctively, feeling grit sting her cheek. Another followed, closer, and then the air was alive with ricochets. The warrior swung down from the saddle, shoved the reins into her hands. "Keep low." He moved with the predator's economy, finding cover behind a boulder and returning fire. Each shot he took was deliberate, measured, the crack of his rifle rolling to the canyon like distant thunder. One of the men above cried out, his rifle clattering down the slope. She tried to keep the horse calm, but the animal danced under the gunfire, nostrils flaring. The warrior gestured sharply, "Move." She urged the horse forward, ducking low, the canyon walls blurring past. He was only steps behind, retreating between shots until they broke into open ground again. The world widened, the sky suddenly enormous above them. They didn't stop until the canyon was a smear in the distance. Only then did she see the dark stain spreading down his sleeve. "You're hurt," she said, sliding from the saddle. "It's nothing." But his face was pale beneath the tan, his movements tighter than before. They found shelter under a crooked overhang where the earth dipped away from the wind. She tore a strip from her hem and pressed it to the wound despite his protest. The blood was hot against her fingers. "You've done this before," she said quietly. His eyes flicked to hers. "What?" "Rescuing people who don't belong to you." His jaw tightened, and for a long moment he didn't answer. Then, softer than she expected, he said, "Once." She waited, sensing more behind the word. "They came from my village at dawn," he said at last, eyes fixed on some point far beyond her. "Burned the lodges, took the people. I tracked them for 3 days. Got 2 out alive. And the rest." He looked at her, and she saw that there was no answer that could be spoken. The wind outside shifted again, carrying the faint scent of smoke, with smoke not from their camp. She stiffened. They're still following. They'll follow until something stops them, he said. Her voice was low. And what if that something is us? He finished tightening the makeshift bandage and tested his arm, flexing the fingers. The pain was there, but it didn't slow him much. Then we make it count. For the first time since the gallows, she felt something shift in her, an understanding that whatever lay ahead, neither of them would turn aside from it. She glanced toward the dark line of the horizon, where the land rose toward jagged silhouettes. If the posse wanted them, they would have to pay for the taking. Somewhere far off, a hawk cried, sharp and solitary, before the wind swallowed the sound. The sky was the color of old tin when she woke, the wind already restless, combing through the prairie grass in long, uneven strokes. The space beside her was empty. His bedroll lay flattened, the faint warmth gone from it. Her pulse quickened. She scanned the horizon and saw him. Far off, a dark figure against the paling east, moving slow toward the ridge. The horse was gone. Her first thought was that he'd left her. The second, sharper and more dangerous, was that he hadn't gone far, only far enough to finish something he hadn't told her about. She set off after him on foot, boots biting into the cold earth, the wind dragging at her skirt. By the time she reached the crest, the settlement lay below, crouched in the gray light. Thin trails of smoke rose from chimneys, drifting flat in the wind. Figures moved in the street, and at the center of it all stood the man with the scar, broad shoulders squared, that eternal grin cutting his face. Even from this distance, she felt his eyes on her, as though he could smell her presence on the air. The warrior was already descending the slope, steps short.